quickly. No airbrush required. You can get a vehicle from unpainted to finished in an hour if you're trying. For these effects, you'll mostly need 3 colors of spray paint, blue tack, a silver pencil, and some materials for the mud. There's a full list in the description. To demonstrate/experiment, I'm using a 3D printed World War II French armored car. It's a simple vehicle with enough raised details that will make these effects really pop. I start with undercoating all the areas that I won't hit with spray paint with a black primer. We'll be doing at least 2 layers of spray paint over most of this, so this isn't really for shading as much as it is for hiding any resin that escapes the spray paint. I do try to darken some areas before spraying, but it makes literally no difference with normal spray paint, so don't bother unless you're using a fancy airbrush. Out comes the first use of the sticky tack to mount these to a piece of cardboard for spray painting. Make sure they're on there pretty firmly. Tape would also work fine. Our first layer will be a nice silver metallic, which will do an even coat all over the top. Next, we're going to set up for some battle damage via a technique called salt chipping. You're going to need some household water and salt. Rock salt is arguably better depending on the size of chips that you want, but table salt will do. Apply water to your shiny vehicle with a brush, or better yet, a small spray bottle. Try to avoid large pools unless it's where you want a lot of chips. Basically, we're going to drizzle salt all over the wet surface, causing it to stick, and use that as a mask for some battle damage later. I'm not going for a specific pattern. The whole point of doing this over just painting the marks is you get nice, natural, random chips. You can also do rust this way, just throw down some rust paint before applying the salt. If you do get too much water somewhere, just use a dry brush or a bit of towel to mop it up. I do try to get a lot of salt on the front, since that's where I figure most bullets would hit and ricochet. Then we hit everything with what will eventually be our secondary camo color. This is a dark blue I had lying around. We're painting in reverse because we're using a mask to make the camo pattern. Here you see the salt stuck to the front, which when removed at the end of all of this will expose parts of the metallic underlayer. Next we're going to make our camo pattern with the blue tack. Important note, you see here I'm being a cheapskate and reusing some putty from earlier. Don't do this. Just use fresh clean stuff. Now you can make your camo shapes however you want. I went for big splotches, but you could easily do stripes or other fancy designs this way with a stencil or something. I just slap it on there and make sure to wrap it around naturally. It needs to stick, but don't press down too firmly where there's a lot of 3D detail because you might get some putty stuck in there, which can be a pain to clean out. Last spray can, a nice camo green that will make up the bulk of this paint job. Now for the most satisfying part. That's what we're looking for. Demask the rest of the model and hope every pull looks that nice. If you do get some putty stuck in somewhere, just dig it out with your nail or a toothpick or something. And here's where that used putty came back to bite by leaving some residue of the paint that was on it from before. At least the salt chipping distracts pretty well from it. Using a stiff brush, brush away any salt that is still stuck on to reveal a nice natural chip in the paint. If it's being stubborn, just use your finger. Next we're going to highlight the edges and details with a silver pencil. Normally I dry brush a metallic, but this worked surprisingly well and I will use it in future projects. I try to get anything that would see a lot of use or just to bring back some details like the bolts. I'm also going to be lazy and use this on the heads of the tools to save time. If you're entering a painting competition or something, then by all means paint the handle of the shovel and such, but you might not be watching the right YouTube channel then if that's your goal. Depending on your preference, you could call it good there, but I like mud, so here we go. My mud recipe needs adhesion, texture, and color. For this mix, I'm using caulking, cheap spackle, and cheap acrylics. I recently drove through some farmland, and the mud that dried on my car was much lighter than I would have, classically expected, so I went for a color similar to that. Obviously, it depends on the soil content of your imaginary battlefield. Mud can be much darker, redder, or whatever. I mix everything into a paste and look at reference photos for where mud would be most likely to gather. Then I take my perfectly good enough painted model and slap this all over it. In hindsight, I do think I got carried away, but the mud does a good job of hiding, or at least distracting from my shortcuts and sins. A brush would probably be better for applying this, but the toothpick was already there, so there we go. Like the salt, I try to be random while still focusing in some areas, like the lower sides and wheel wells. I made this thing look like it had gotten stuck in muddy roads repeatedly, then dried out, but I still liked the overall effect. Obviously on your project, you can be as subtle or heavy-handed as you like. Let me know in the comments if you think this was too much mud. Here's how mine turned out. I think the first one I did off camera turned out better mud-wise, but frankly I don't care. Most people aren't going to remember that I didn't paint the tool handles, they're just going to think, wow, that mud was, maybe cool. Subscribe if you want to see me vandalize the contents of this epic sci-fi box I got recently. I'll start with some zombies, I think. How hard can they be to paint?